Hey everyone, welcome back to At Pace, the People and Culture Talk show brought to you by the Institute of Organizational Dynamics. I'm Jonathan Rodrigues. I'm going to be your host today. And as the coordinator for the Institute of Organizational Dynamics, I once again welcome all of you to this episode. It's an online talk show hosted by us, and of course, which is a membership think tank of the TCM group. And we intend to have a neutral view on top stories from across the globe in the field of organizational dynamics and people and culture. The idea is to give you an unrehearsed, unscripted, unfiltered perspective on things that are really of matter to us. And I got some very exciting speakers to be discussing this very, very important topic for us. And I'm really excited to get started. But just to quickly introduce you to them, we have Beth Myers joining us from Arlington, Virginia. Beth is a mediator, area advisor, and conflict management coach, and she's based, of course, in the US. Beth, thank you so much for joining us this morning for you.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We also have Mary Brown, who is a former lecturer in philosophy, actually, and a professional mediator and a workplace conflict restoration consultant based in Martin, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us, Mary.
Happy to be here.
Mary was actually part of our first episode on EdPay. So if you missed that, go back to our YouTube channel and you'll find more about that there. Also joining us from the UK is Jonathan Wilson, who is a retired senior law enforcement officer and a staunch advocate against workplace bullying. He's the current ambassador for Stop Hurt at Work. Thank you for joining us, Jonathan.
Yeah, nice to be with you.
Awesome. So we are doing this on Zoom for the first time. So I'm going to request all of you, of course, to keep your videos and audios on mute. The rest of the participants joining us, if you have a question, drop it in the chat box. I'll pick it up from there, or maybe one of the speakers will pick it up from there, and we'll address it. And we might even, invite you to kind of unmute yourselves and join us in the conversation. We want to keep this as interactive as possible. So very, very fascinating topic. I know it's been doing the rounds of probably our social media feeds for the last couple of months now. This thought of quiet quitting and quiet firing. And we thought we'll just try and dissect that a bit from a people and culture perspective, and what does this really, really mean for us, as people who are working with different professionals, involved in workplace culture and organizational dynamics. And we are very, very interested to understand how this actually, impacts the health and harmony of a workplace. So we all know the trends that are driven by social media, VUPLA, as you call it, and whatever the definition of quiet quitting is, it's been happening, I think, much before this whole trend started, either on TikTok or on some other social media site. But just to get a first impression from our speakers today, what do you think is the biggest consequence of this attitude kind of gaining herd mentality, especially in the social media region? Beth, would you like to take us off?
Yeah, well, in terms of consequence, I'm not sure that I see anything different than what has existed in workplaces since there have been workplaces. The terminology is certainly new, and the ability to communicate through our social media outlets is new. And so that might be more of why we see this as that quote herd mentality, because we have more access to this information and it can be shared more readily across industries and professions. I believe Jonathan was in law enforcement. Mary's been a professor. Here I am, a mediator, and I spent many years in the commercial lines insurance industry and as a solopreneur. We can all talk now. And we can define things like quiet quitting, quiet firing, quiet hiring. And so I just think that the consequence of our ability to communicate is that we're now talking about this issue more openly than ever before. And so awareness then becomes the consequence. And what do we do with awareness? So this may be a launching pad, this new awareness, for creating better management tools and communication tools in workplace. That's a long way of getting around consequence.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just wondering, Mary, before I throw this across to you as well, there are, while this conversation was actually, gaining momentum on a lot of social media handles, I think there were a lot of CEOs, who came out from, of course, across the globe. I've seen this kind of news stories pop up where CEOs are coming up and saying the generation today is getting too, I would say, sensitive about working and working hard. And they keep talking about quiet quitting, and there's different trends that are coming up, and they should be ready to work hard and burn the midnight oil, if you call it, and make it work. And there's very extreme comments coming in, kind of I would say, lower the voice of this quiet quitting movement that was kind of taking place on a lot of social media handles. Do you think that kind of had an impact for you to then blow out proportion to what it is today?
I think I missed something in there. I think with the response of some CEOs coming out and saying, burn the midnight oil, just tough it out, show us what you're worth. That attitude has also been around for a long time. And as somebody who has spent a lot of time with entrepreneurs and has been an entrepreneur, yeah, you do that, especially when you're building your own business. When you are motivated to really want to accomplish something, you're gonna do that. But that's not necessarily what an employee is hired to do. In some organizations, you bring in a partner or you bring in people because of that energy, and that's what you want, and you're very clear about it. I mean, really strong leaders are going to be clear about what they're looking for. But in many companies, I was talking with some millennials the other day, and I asked them about this concept because, hey, we're going to be here talking about it today. And one of them got silent, and the other one basically said, hey, look, you're hired to do a job. You're doing your job. How is that quitting? And they're right. There's no wrong to this. If you're doing what you've been asked to do, are you quitting? If the employer wants you to do more, why didn't the employer say they want you to do more?
Right.
Be clear. And in the articles, you did such a nice job of sending us a variety of articles. And in many of them, the focus was on pay, people saying they're going to act their wages, these kinds of things. But there were two articles that were particularly good, honing in. One was from NPR and one I believe was the Economic Times, or maybe communication. That's what it comes down to. If you don't want these trends to continue, become better communicators. I mean, Mary, Jonathan, did you have anything to say there?
Yeah, I certainly think that. I think there's a real importance here, a really important factor here about leadership, and it's about leaders, employers sitting down and regularly communicating. I mean, I don't think we live in an era anymore where we should be doing annual performance appraisals. Leaders should be sitting down with people once a week and saying, this is what's really, really good, etc. I think you could work better in an encouraging form by trying this or looking at this. Have you thought about reflecting on this? And giving the employee a picture of where they are and how they're doing and how they're coping, what they're doing really, really well, what they might need to adjust, etc. And at that point, you can talk about expectations, about productivity, etc., etc. But if you're left with no guidance till the end of the year, and suddenly and it's been smiles directed at you by leadership all year, and suddenly at the end of the year, someone suddenly tells you, well, actually, we've been really disappointed with you over the last year, etc., etc. That leaves you probably very, very demotivated at that point, because you're thinking, certainly I would be. I'd be thinking, why hasn't anyone told me about these expectations? Because I've been channeling along quite happily, thinking that I was doing what everyone expected of me, etc.
And I think to your question, Jonathan, about the herd mentality consequence, I think one consequence can be, Beth, as you mentioned, people saying, well, I'm doing my job. How is that quitting? I am doing my job. And I think it's the difference of thinking between a job and a career, right? So, and I think that can be a consequence maybe of people, the TikTok phenomenon or, social media think, yeah, I'm just getting paid to do X. Why am I going to go above and beyond and do Y? But it's a very kind of narrow perspective of, I'm just here doing this right now, instead of what are my long-term goals? That does not mean that people need to be burned out, right? Burning the midnight oil is not treating people with respect. Sometimes, of course, we have to dig in and there are long hours. But I think there's this threat of making it so that people aren't really doing what's in their best interest, in their career interest. But of course, the opportunity, Jonathan, as you mentioned, with communication, it's such a great opportunity for business leaders to say, hey, there's quiet quitting, there's quiet firing, and that is not commensurate with our mission and the values of our organization. Let's talk about it. So if you see quiet quitting going on, or you feel that impulse because the conditions are not humane, the conditions are not people-centric where we're helping you thrive, let's talk about it. And coaching people and putting the atmosphere in the organization so that we talk, right? Quiet is different than listening. We want to listen and start those conversations.
That's really interesting, Mary. Actually, a member of the Institute of Organization Dynamics wrote in yesterday evening to just mention about, sometimes it all comes down to, being empathetic, but at the same time, not being naive about what's happening. And there has been a misunderstanding sometimes that quiet firing is kind of, it is actually the extreme opposite of quiet quitting, which is not. If you go to look at the actual understanding of what it's quiet quitting is, basically, as Beth put it rightly, it's about a person doing what's the bare minimum and not going over and beyond unnecessarily, which is not in the expectations of when you signed up for your job, right? And whereas quiet firing is once again this place where employers are not ready to go out there and address that conflict, and because they don't have probably the skills, or rather it's communication skills or conflict management skills. The lack of skills makes them, stay away from addressing this problem, and then, basically just ignoring an employee out there. So besides the communication problem, I'm wondering whether, is there anything else that, leaders in positions can do, especially with regards to quiet firing, that can make them more effective in the situation, especially when you can see these trends developing in the workplace?
Well, I'm just going to say that I don't think that a lot of employers, I'm going to speak from a perspective of a United States employer, because I understand, I know well that cultures are different across the world. And I know, for example, TCM is widely used in the UK. And so there are more enlightened, I'll call them enlightened employers in other parts of the world. Here, our laws and our legal structure do not have conflict resolution policies in place. They're not mandated. I mean, an enlightened leader would have an organizational policy that allowed for early intervention, and I call it early intervention from a mediation and a conflict resolution perspective. I mean, if a line supervisor sees conflict going on with some of their workers, peer to peer, or even if the line supervisor is in conflict with one of their staff, there's every reason to go to an HR policy that says, hey, we can have a mediation. We can talk about the tensions between us, and nobody needs to know about what goes on in that conversation. There's no official record in your HR file that go, so that kind of communication really helps to solve a lot of communication issues in the organization. And that early intervention isn't going to happen if senior leadership isn't fully on board. If senior leadership isn't able to have those conversations with their direct reports or their peers, then it's not going to become a policy in the organization. And so the number one way of dealing with workplace conflict is avoidance. And avoidance leads to the passive aggressive activities of quiet firing. If a supervisor doesn't like one of their direct reports, they're not going to take the time to get to know what's going on with the direct report. What's happening? How can I help you? How can I support you to be that stellar employee? That's not where they go. They get into this avoidance, passive aggressiveness. It can be called workplace bullying. Jonathan knows quite a bit about that as well. And we just don't have the policies and procedures in place to work with it. We can have them. They exist. Models exist, but we're not using them.
No, and I think, sorry, I'm going to let you go first this time.
Okay. Beth, I completely agree. Having, people-centric policies and procedures so that when we have problems, because we will have problems, humans work together, and so we're going to have problems, that we have a policy in place. And it has to go with the values of the organization, which is, can help all of us come around and rally around how we are going to treat one another and how we can expect to be treated. But it has to be much more than, just the mission statement as you walk into the organization. And it can't just be one-off trainings.
Right.
With AI and the ability to, have everybody watch a 30-minute training or a 60-minute training, and the DEI box has been checked off or whatever it might be, and we did that this year. And so now we're all good to go. It can't be that. It's
You've really done nothing.
right. As Jonathan said, meeting with your supervisor every week, having those constant conversations, human conversations, putting it into the DNA of the organization that here we deal with conflict. Conflict is not bad. Conflict is good. It means we're engaged. And when it's negative or when we have an issue, we deal with it because that's who we are.
But even the negative conflict is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to solve a problem, expose a problem, name it, frame it, and work on how to get beyond it. So it really is your conflict mindset. Is this necessarily a bad thing? Sure, it feels tense. There's some feelings around it that aren't positive, but we've been trained to have.
I think it's a really simple way for me.
Not trained.
A really simple way for me to describe it would be being asked to take a journey without being given a roadmap, being told to get from A to B without being given a roadmap. So you're having to find your own way, and you haven't got any signposts, so you don't know if you're traveling on the right journey. If you don't have that communication in the workplace, and this is where you start to feel isolated, or people start to feel isolated. And this is where the concept of quiet firing is coming along, because it's you're left with that position of, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm valued. I don't know if I'm doing it right enough. I don't feel like I'm doing enough. And no one's talking to me. So I'm feeling isolated. I don't think anyone wants me here, etc. There aren't any opportunities for me. And those are all the things. And it's as simple, I think, of putting in that as that concept of saying an employer in quiet firing is saying, go from A to B, but find your own way there, and there won't be any guidance, there won't be any road signs on that journey, and there's no map, and you just get lost. And this is where people then quit in the form of the quiet firing. Now, sometimes that's done intentionally as well. Sometimes that is done intentionally to get people. And I could say, when we were talking about quiet firing, I won't stay on too long, but if I reflect back to my own experience when I found myself in a particular area where there was a lot of nepotism and I challenged some wrongs and some status quo, I found myself, when I reflect back, in being quietly fired initially because my boss had never got any time to see me. He'd regularly go out for coffees with all my peers. He'd never got time to see me. I was doing a really important piece of work that had government drive behind it, and he had no time to help me, no support, etc. Anything that I wanted to do, resources, there was no conversation about it. It was taking resources away from my department, etc., etc. And I look back, and it was really difficult staying motivated because there weren't even conversations about taking resources. I'm taking them away from that department, and I wasn't finding out from him. I was finding out from HR when I went to replace perhaps people that had moved on and I had vacancies. Oh no, you've lost those vacancies now because he's given them to someone else. That's that sort of quiet firing experience that I think, I look back and reflect back and think it was part of it. There was other bullying that went on later, etc. But yeah, that's my view on quiet firing.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you for sharing that with us. But sorry, I just have a very interesting comment in the chat box actually from Nikki, and she talks about this discretional effort. Nikki, I'm wondering whether you would like to unmute yourself and kind of maybe substantiate on your point, that that's I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Yeah, well, we've always talked for years about those people when you're looking at performance and talent succession, you're looking for people who give that discretional effort, the ones that go above and beyond. They're the ones who are engaged with what's going on. They feel empowered to say something and act on that. And it almost feels like quiet quitting is the lack of that discretional effort that we see within organizations.
Interesting.
Is the key word discretional effort? Because if it's discretional, it sounds to me like it's choice. So if someone is choosing to go above and beyond, they're more likely to get promoted and have the more positive career path, as Mary pointed out. But if it's discretional, is the employer then imposing an expectation that people are going to make that choice to go do extra? This is, I wonder about expectations and setting expectations. Mary's nodding her head. So,
I agree. Yeah, I agree, Beth. I mean, so much of our issues in our workplaces would be better if we had clear and direct communication. So when we look at a job description, what precisely does this mean? And fleshing it out and talking about what does it mean to succeed here? What are your goals? What do you want to do? What does it mean? What does it look like to do your job excellently? Right? If you want an A on being a good employee, what does that look like? And having those regular conversations, because as we contribute to our organizations and we're on board with our mission, if we have those clear directives of what the organization is asking of me, then we can also give feedback as to whether it's sustainable effort, whether it's unreasonable, whether or not we need help or support in order to execute what it is that is required of me. So having these regular conversations, listening to each other, investing in our workers by giving them the support or the training or whatever it is so that they can achieve, while also having a work-life balance, right? This quiet quitting, a lot of people are saying, yeah, I'm not going to live for work. I want to have a meaningful job. I also want to have a meaningful home life. And I don't need to be at home at 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night answering emails. It's unreasonable. So trying to find that balance where I can have a career, be engaged and do meaningful work, and also have a life outside. And that comes through conversation.
Yeah, there's the contrast there, isn't there, between live to work or work to live. And I think there's a danger when people are putting in that extra discretionary effort, that sometimes it can generate the presenteeism, and you see people feeling then that they have to hang around in the office or the workplace to look like they're fully committed. Well, actually, my experience, and I used to manage a lot of different staff, my experience is that people were trying to do presenteeism all the time, weren't actually operating as effectively because they were tired, they were exhausted, they weren't thinking clearly. They weren't the ones that were coming up with the best ideas all the time because they were absolutely exhausted, because they were doing this presenteeism. And some of them, yeah, they were really addicted and committed to their work. But I think there's a really important thing. A colleague said to me many years ago, because I used to work some very long hours and my daughter was born, and he said, Jonathan, be really, really careful. And this is within the police, but he said to me, he was an older guy, and he said to me, I have seen too many senior police officers at their retirement leaving apologizing to their grown-up kids because they haven't been around while their kids are growing up. And this is the first time they're actually communicating them when they've come around to retiring. What's that about? people missing their whole lives, with their children to put themselves into that work, and this is where employers I think employers have a real responsibility to make sure that their staff understand there's only so much that they want and expect from them as well. And instead of allowing people to put all this discretionary effort in, which becomes harmful to them and the delivery of the work that they do in the workplace.
I'm really interested in this concepts that have now become social media trends, of course, quiet quitting. Is this something you, from my perspective, is this something you claim to be doing? Or is this something that you can label or pinpoint somebody doing. Like, I'm just trying to figure this out, because there might be somebody who's not, and a lot of people who are I myself is someone who goes above and beyond sometimes my workplace on my good days to go out and do that and really make an effort. And I think this is something, sometimes it depends on people's moods, it depends on people's drivers, it depends on people's personalities. So there are people who are extroverts who can go above and beyond and do things. There are some people who are introverts, they do very well what they do, right, in the workplace, and they cannot go out and socialize and kind of go up and beyond what is expected out of them. And I'm wondering, when you say quiet quitting, do you say this something for yourself, or can you label this on somebody else and say, hey, Mary, I think you're quiet quitting, or is it up to Mary to say I am quiet quitting? I'm just trying to reckon this. I mean, because as people start claiming that, okay, I actually, and start admitting, 2 years ago I actually went through a phase where I was quiet quitting, and that's more of a claim where you're admitting or you're confessing to that. But as people start confessing and admitting to things, I'm wondering whether the opposite process starts happening, where employers start accusing employees of quiet quitting. And so I'm wondering the negatives of that happening as well. I'm wondering if there are any thoughts on that.
I'm curious about why labeling and identifying people who might be quiet quitting is, are we looking to place blame here? I'm not sure what's going on with that, because some people are going to be more vocal about it.
Right.
And I'm going to go back to this Gallup poll that essentially talked about how, it doesn't say how many people they surveyed, but here it is. I have it right here. Gallup's data doesn't really show a sizable shift in how workers feel about their jobs over the last several years. I think this was a September 22 article. And so it's a normal feature considered here in the American workplace, a normal feature. People are merely talking about it now when they didn't necessarily talk about it 10, 20 years ago. Right. I might not have told my coworker, Mary, that I'm just going to come in and do the minimum. Or maybe Mary and I are best buddies. And I did let her know, Mary, I'm not staying today till the 6 o'clock meeting or whatever. I'm just going to go home and stay with my newborn child or whatever. But we wouldn't have called it quiet quitting. We would have understood that maybe I wasn't going to go above and beyond anymore, but Mary was still going to continue to go above and beyond. We didn't call it quiet quitting. And even if that had been labeled, my question is, so what? If the communication isn't happening, and I'd like to hear from Jonathan about the concept of mutual respect between boss and employee in that communication. He talked about giving, I think Mary did also, performance reviews, for example, checking in on performance more regularly, weekly, monthly, and some of these articles mention that as well. Is performance review always, or should it be top-down command control? I'm the boss. Here's what I've observed in you. Now go fix it. Or should it be that reciprocal conversation with, hey, how you doing? How you feeling? Because before you start telling somebody what they need to change, maybe if you understand what's been going on for them, you might know that they were a little slow this week. And you can say, well, I noticed you were a little slow. I was just checking in to see how you're doing, and let it go.
Yeah.
So that kind of communication. So I'm not sure about the importance of labeling who's doing this, who's not doing it. Is it quiet quitting because somebody feels they're being quiet fired? I mean, are we going to spend too much time trying to figure out who's being quiet? Or are we going to work on what we can do to make sure that if that's been going on in our organization, and the statistics show that, yeah, probably has been, we start to curb that trend. We start to become a more transparent, supportive, empowering of our workers organization.
Yeah. I'm
just thinking out loud there.
Yeah, I think if someone came, and after the conversation I talked about with that boss of mine, and I thought, hey, actually I need to step back a little bit because he's right, and I've got a young daughter. If someone had then come and said to me, hey, Jonathan, you're quitting, I would have wanted to have a conversation. Well, what are you actually expecting from me? Because I still feel like I'm doing what's expected of me. I'm just not working for hours and hours, leaving my house at 5 o'clock in the morning and coming home at 9:30 at night. I'm trying to work more regular hours now because I have a young child at home, but I still feel I'm delivering. And on days where I really need it, I will stay right through the night if I have to, you know, but it's not going to be a regular thing. And it's about having, you wouldn't want someone coming to you and saying, I think you're quiet quitting. You'd want, you know, I've noticed your work patterns change, you know, what's happening, etc. Hey, I've got a young daughter, you know, she's just a little baby. Her mother needs some support as well, you know, because it's quite tiring looking after a young baby, needs nappies changing, is crying all night through the night, etc. I need to be there to put some support in. So the key is communication. And I think, unfortunately, we have too many people who sometimes aspire to leadership without necessarily having the communication skills to come forward and lead. And then there should be more effort on trying to help leaders to understand, you know, what they need to do to communicate and keep that contact with people so that they understand what's happening, you know, what's happening with employers, and they can be there to support, empower, you know, liberate necessarily, you know, train.
I like terms are very helpful, because a lot of times we have all these things going on in our heads and we don't know how to really even think about it or reflect on it. And so terms like psychological safety, I think that's, you know, that whole concept, it's very powerful to really think about what that is. And now that I'm thinking about what it is, I think about how I can bring that about. What am I doing in my job if I'm a supervisor or the owner to bring that about, or just an everyday worker. And so quiet quitting, I think, is a real great opportunity for people to reflect and say, hey, I'm being taken advantage of, and that's not okay. I'm in a toxic work environment and I'm not being recognized, I'm not being supported, I'm not being promoted. And this quiet quitting lets me say, oh, that's what I'm feeling. And so it's this great opportunity for the individual to reflect, that's not who I want to be. So maybe this is not the place for me. And so I can start putting the wheels in motion to move forward, find a better situation. But also for the bosses to think, oh, okay, well, quiet quitting is a thing. Is that going on with my employees? Are they not feeling supported? It is this opportunity to look into and check in. And so I think terms can have this powerful effect of, that's what I've been feeling. And now that I know, I'm more able to act, because it's just like with conflict, when we're stuck in it and I can't pinpoint the specific behavior that's problematic, it's hard to move forward because I think, oh, this person is awful or they're out to get me. And so what am I supposed to do about that? But if I can think about a specific behavior, now I can spring into action. So I think it has this opportunity, really is an opportunity for individuals and organizations to look at quiet firing, quiet quitting as an opportunity for change and growth.
Yeah, I think Beth, Mary, Jonathan, you made yourself very clear on, you know, quiet quitting and how leaders can actually handle that much better when they suspect that somebody might not be enjoying their role that much. And if you feel that is the case, then I think it's very clearly laid out how you can address that in a much better way, much more effective way, much more empathic way, I would say. Let's focus a little bit more on quiet firing before we wrap up. I'm wondering what happens, what's the best advice you would give to somebody who feels or suspects like they are a victim of quiet firing. So, and they are experiencing something like that where despite their best, they've been ignored, despite their best, they do not get that recognition. And whatever communications are happening or whatever they try to address is, you know, falling to deaf ears. What do you do in that kind of a situation when you know you're just an employee, you know, and there are many more people that you work with there, and you might not have that bigger say. You cannot just walk out of that room and say, you know, I quit and I'm going to take the entire workforce with me. What do you do in those kind of situations when you know you feel or you suspect that that's happening with
you?
Well, I
Everything's
think
contextual. Sorry, go ahead, Jonathan.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think it's, you know, I mean, and I've had a lot of people recently saying to me on internet when I've put up articles around quiet firing, they're saying, why do we use that term? Let's just be clear about it. It's workplace bullying. And I was like, well, no, it isn't, because quiet firing isn't always, you know, people can be bullied at work without an intention of getting rid of them. I've seen managers who decide they'll shout and things. They think they can get productivity, and workplace bullying is an effective management tool to enhance performance and stuff like that. There may be bullying used in quiet firing. Let's just quietly push that person out of the door. I think for me, I think if you felt that you were being quietly fired, the most important thing is the number one step duty to yourself is your own psychological health and well-being. So you need to make a decision. Is it actually, I can stand here and I can fight this. I can challenge these things. I can go and say to an employer, this is what I thought of HR and I feel this is what's happening. I can start to take copious notes about all the different ways that I've been treated unfairly, or the occasions that I feel I've been bullied. But I think also at the same time, you need to say is, how much is this job worth my own personal health and well-being? And have I got the skills? I know that I am confident that I could go out during this time and go and find myself another job in a less toxic culture where I will find people that I'm compatible with, I'll feel comfortable with, I'll feel safe with, psychologically safe with, etc. Someone has to make those, anyone who's facing this has to make those decisions. If you're in a how can I say, there are careers where it's very, very difficult to move jobs, etc., and where even there may be big organizations, news travels, so if someone's trying to do you harm to move you, they don't stop there. They send messaging about why you're a bad person on, and that sort of can carry with you. If you're in that sort of career, then possibly you need to take the I'm going to try and fight this, challenge this, etc. straight on. But other careers where you can just go and move to another employer and do more or less a similar job, and that news isn't going to follow you, someone would be glad to take you on. I'd certainly be looking at trying to move very, very quickly, because I say it's, from personal experience, the mental health well-being is the most important thing. And when you're spending a large proportion of your week, your life at work, so it can be very, very harmful to you psychologically if you're in a toxic environment like that.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. I think if you find yourself in that situation, the first thing you want to do is talk to somebody. You're not alone. If you have a mentor, hopefully you have developed mentors. If you haven't, reach out to someone you trust or a mental health professional and bounce ideas back and forth. Look into your HR department and find out if not all HR departments are going to be friendly to you, but some are. If there's an ombuds or some sort of mediation scheme in place, start looking for resources, start networking in other departments to see if there are resources depending on the size of the organization to start building a team and a network, sort of maybe this microculture within the organization to help you find the best path forward. But then you're not alone. And you've got other voices. But Jonathan, I really like what you said about choice, right? We don't always have to fight the system. We don't always have to. It's empowering for the individual, given their own mental reserves, their own family situation, life situation, as to what do they want to do, right? Instead of, well, this is what you have to do for the health of the organization and other people. You are important, and moving forward is very specific to who you are.
I agree, Mary. It's specific to who you are and what the context is. And really, you have choice, but you may not have much choice. Creating that support group is wonderful, and you may find that creating your support group comes from family and friends and not within the organization. Especially, as Jonathan points out, if you're in an industry where word travels, and if someone wants to paint you as a negative and not an asset, that's going to impede your ability to get a job in the same industry. Now, one of the things that's key here in the US, we don't have a lot of organizations that have ongoing relationships with either with external mediators that are available to all staff. Certainly that is almost unheard of. Ombuds people are available in some organizations, but usually the larger organizations. And today you can get ombuds type roles. People outsource that. I've acted in that capacity for small to mid-sized organizations, but only for a brief period of time. They don't keep you on forever because they don't feel they have the need or they don't have the budget. But also, you can be very much alone. If you feel like you're being fired, a couple of these articles said you should talk to your boss. And I read those articles and I went, yeah, right. That's not going to do you any good. That's what? Somebody put words on a paper. They got paid to write that story. I'm sorry, you're being quietly fired. You're not really going to be able to have a conversation with that boss. Are you able to have a conversation with the boss's boss? Are you able to go to HR? If you go to HR, they're going to ask you likely to file a formal grievance. And what happens when the formal grievance process begins? Boom, that voice shut down. They're going to separate you and that person. There's going to be a wall up. You are going to be isolated. And it may add to that psychological harm that's going on. So we do have some struggles here in the way our systems have been historically structured for helping people through. It's almost as if it's a document out process. As soon as somebody issues a complaint, boom, how do we get rid of them? And HR is there to support the company. HR is there to support the company, therefore the bosses. They're not necessarily there to support you in your effort to help make positive change in the organization. As individuals, the HR executives might want to do that. That could be their real goal. They really want to help it be a better place. But for the policies and procedures in place, they may be stuck. They can try to help you, it's a conundrum.
Because many HR managers will all be the ones that are saying to the leaders in the organization, well, stop, you're now acting illegally. And, whilst they may want to support that person who's being targeted, their responsibility is to support the organization that doesn't find itself in a legal pitfall. So they're saying, I'm not supporting you. I'm not working with that because that's illegal. So the managers leaders may then find another avenue, etc. Like just as you say, isolating people, because you're not going to be happy at work if you become pretty lonely and feel useless and confused, are you? So it's done more. It can be done more subtly then. It's interesting because Gary Namey, who's from the Workplace Bullying Institute, in his book describes, and I don't subscribe to this completely, because I do a lot of work on LinkedIn with a lot of HR managers that are very keen on stamping out workplace bullying. Yes. They're quite passionate about it. But Gary Namey describes HR as the black ops of the organization, i.e. it's the secret commando sort of route of secret military operation to push someone out the organization, etc. The moment they raise the hand or a question of I'm being bullied or I'm being treated unfairly. So HR, can be perceived that way because their loyalty lies to the organization rather than the individual.
Just a quick reminder, Beth, I'll come to you very soon. There is a feedback form that I just put in the chat box because we're reaching the fag end of this session today. And feel free to kind of share your thoughts about it. It just helps us make our sessions better. Of course, for you to be also introduced to the Institute of Organizational Dynamics, I'm going to be putting out a few more links that you can go and check some of the older episodes as well. There are a lot of fantastic comments that have come in there. Beth, I'm not going to step on your thought process right now, but feel free to take this forward and then we can wrap up in a few minutes.
We were just talking about HR and how HR is kind of in a difficult position where as an individual and as an executive and as somebody who's trained in HR, you enter into this career where you really are there to be beneficial and to support the entire organization, meaning all the people and employees. But when you get there and you get into your career, you find that you too may be restricted by the laws and policies. And so there are many HR executives out there who work really hard to try to bring in best practices. I mean, when I get called by an HR director, one of the most common terms I hear is, you do your job, so I don't have to do mine. They don't want to fire people. They want the mediator to come in and have these conversations or facilitate these conversations with people who are in conflict, such that either well, there is a resolution, and somebody may eventually decide to leave the organization, but they've had the conversations. They've explored that. And those, again, are the HR directors who are really trying to keep this organization together, but they typically only call in an outsider like me when it's a senior level situation, or it's a fast growth startup, or there's some kind of I've been called in with some lower level.
Beth, we seem to be getting you in bits and pieces. Let's give her a couple of seconds to come back, maybe. The key words that I'm hearing here is, until we get Beth back, is basically communication. That's I think the most important thing for us right now. And I think all of us agree on this call that neither of these practices are healthy. Either it's quiet quitting or quiet firing. And for someone like me, I would say I haven't experienced this myself in extreme proportions, but maybe in slightly minute proportions of having experienced both quiet quitting and quiet firing. And I think I'll personally admit and confess that it came down to communications, and came down to ability to have this conversation with somebody. If it was, I felt like somebody was quite firing me, that ability to have that conversation with the HR, with the boss. But we lost you for a couple of seconds there. Any wrapping up thoughts?
Not really. I would just say stay in touch with your HR director to the extent you can. Get a feel for what kind of an organization you're in. Are they really going to be there to help you resolve issues, or should you go ahead and quietly quit while you look for something else?
Awesome. Jonathan, Mary, Beth, thank you so much for joining us today. This was, of course, an interesting conversation on a topic that's been around our social media feeds for quite some time. I'm sure that this is not going to be the only time we're talking about this at the Institute of Organization Dynamics. I've shared a few links with you guys in the chat box. Feel free to drop in there. Once again, to everyone who joined us live, thank you so much. This will be on YouTube in a couple of days where you can watch it again. Once again, Mary, Jonathan, Beth, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.